Your outsourcing practices should be evaluated against your contractual agreements, the ones that you used when your organization handed over control of the IS functions. And of course, what are we saying? We're saying auditing, right? What is really happening? What did those contractors, that third party, do versus what the contract says they're supposed to do? And you're basically comparing to make sure that that those activities are matching what's under contract. Either number one, to make sure you're getting your money out of the contract, but usually the contractual agreement charter was designed with the thoughts of risk management and many other considerations besides just, you're going to run this service for us. And, agreements about their doing independent auditing and their reporting about errors. You want to make sure that all of that works. Now, the reasons you might outsource, right, is again, why you might outsource. And I've tried to lay down a good foundation of examples of when you would. Remember, maybe you have a desire that you want to focus on your core activities, and it might be easier to outsource some of those non-core activities. It could be pressure on profit margins. Like I said, it may be cheaper in some instances to outsource rather than hire people internally. You may need more help. You may not have sufficient resources internally, and you want to become more competitive, but not necessarily to, and I know this sounds bad, but not necessarily to the dedication of hiring somebody full-time. That it might be that to get the more resources in, it's easier to have this third party take over some or enhance some of your resources so you can become more competitive. And of course, if it doesn't work, it's just a contractual agreement. When you're done outsourcing, you're done outsourcing. And of course, it also gives you more flexibility as an organization. Because, I worked at this one company, it was a training provider. And what they decided to do was that they're going to start making videos. And so they hired one or two little interns, I say little, I shouldn't say that, I mean young, right, interns, to go in there and kind of start playing around and working with video. Next thing I knew, it just grew into this huge separate media company making commercials and everything else. And they started by kind of outsourcing. They didn't hire full-time people. They hired people that were still in school. They called them an internship. In a way, they kind of outsourced it. And it gave that company some flexibility to look at some of their competitive advantages, right? So they're becoming more competitive, and it seems to have taken off to the point where now they have this full staff that works strictly in media, and it's gone beyond just trying to deliver training into commercials and a lot of other stuff. So again, those might be reasons why there's outsourcing. That's a part of what you want to investigate. Now, as we're considering or looking at the considerations for outsourcing, some of the things you should think about, of course, is that you want to have some service quality expectations. Now, there are many models like the compatibility maturity model, ITIL, ISO methodologies that can help give you the guidelines that you need for your quality expectations. You also want to make sure that you determine the types of access control and security administration and who's going to maintain that control. Because again, remember, you're bringing third-party people in to your organization. They might not have the loyalties that you would hope that an internal resource would have. And so you may decide that they're going to have limited access. I run into this all the time as a contractor. When I come in, they give me a visitor's badge often, and it works like the front doors and the restrooms and the lunchroom. Everywhere else is kind of like, I'm just stuck. Working on a nuclear facility. There, the access control was so limited that everywhere I went, I had an escort with me, and they would announce my presence to the room before I entered the room because they knew I was technically a security risk, and so their goal was to make sure nothing of top secret nature was on the desk, on the screens, made sure that that room was safe for me to walk through. So you might have to make sure that you determine, hopefully not to that extent, but again, the types of access control, security administration, and who's in charge of that. Determining the change and version control and testing requirements in the contract. Okay, so again, we need to understand that this is our organization. Even though we've outsourced and they're handling something for us, we want to make sure that they understand what our change control or version control is about, what our testing requirements are, prior to them just deciding they're going to upgrade what they do for us without telling anybody. It needs to be controlled. We need to test it. It needs to, be implemented, phased in. All of these things that we use in terms of change control, things we'll talk about more often, or more later on, I should say. But that's a part of what we need to look at as our considerations. Stating specific and defined performance parameters. Yeah, it's kind of like the employee evaluation. I'm hiring you to do this service. I need to find a way to add a rating to it that I know you're meeting that performance. If I hired you to maintain some network connectivity, one of my performance indicators might be what we call the 4 nines or 5 nines, right? How much uptime have we had? How much downtime have we had? Because if you don't hit a certain agreed upon level of uptime, and your outages that you've caused are more than we've paid for, that could either be a change in the contract, meaning I'm not going to pay you as much, or it might be enough that we're saying you're gone, we're bringing in this new team. But we need to know a way to be able to define what that performance is and how that we can verify it. We also, in the case of disagreements, have to have a path for this disputes, escalations, resolution. We might even have mediation clauses in those contracts. If a contract needs to change because technology changes, we should have provisions about how we can go about making changes in the contract while the contract is still running. And of course, we also need to ask those third parties, are you hiring any third parties? Because if the third party hires, would that make them a fourth party? Who knows? If they hire subcontractors, I shouldn't be aware of, because they're technically working for people who are working for me that may have a hand in my business. I need to know what those relationships are. Now, much of this information I just talked about is going to be included in what we call the service level agreement, or the SLA. But it's it's also a part of the auditing process, right? We talked about, and you may notice, we may often talk about the ideas behind these concepts, because the goal is to understand them well enough that we know what questions we're going to ask and what we're going to look for, and what should be a part of the audit, should this be part of the scope of our audit. Some of the other areas that we want to do evaluations on when it comes to the human resource management is the issues of my company or the organization I'm auditing having a worldwide presence, or even just maybe a multi-state presence. We need to talk about those practices and strategies that need to be considered, especially if we're going to make the decision, do we outsource or not. So what are we looking at? Well, different countries have different regulatory requirements, different legal requirements, different tax issues. We can even say that about different states. We have to worry about the continuity of operations. I mean, if I'm working with an outsource, maybe I chose an outsourced company that is, providing a service, and they're in a different country altogether. I mean, we see that a lot with call centers these days. Customers call, and they get routed to a call center that's overseas. We have to worry about the continuity. I mean, number one, the communications for that long-distance phone calls, the hours that they're operating, and of course, we have to be concerned now that we're paying a company that is in a different country. So again, different legal, regulatory, tax issues, the staffing, the personnel we have to be concerned with. I've already mentioned the telecommunication issues, right? The ability to communicate back and forth. There's also cross-border, cross-cultural issues. I hear lots of people complain about some of those issues when they're talking on the phones to the help desks that might be overseas. So those are issues we have to deal with, because we have to find ways to, get more profitable, to get good service, but also have good customer satisfaction. And so these are all issues we have to deal with. Now, when it comes to the auditing of a third party, number one, you should ask, does the service level agreement, the SLA that you have, require a third-party audit? I think that's an important aspect, that if I'm going to hire or outsource, that they understand that I'm going to have somebody go in there and inspect what they're doing. And that's part of the audit. So it might be required. Now, the audit, if it was done by a third party, that doesn't mean I'm sending my auditor in, but an independent third party, the audit and those results need to be available to your auditor for your organization, and they need to be found that they're acceptable. Now, acceptable is more than just, the report looks nice, it was well written, it's acceptable, but also we want to ask questions. The auditor wants to ask questions about that third-party audit. Did they have the experience, the expertise to know what they're asking for, to know what they're looking for, right? So it's not just the report that's acceptable, but the whole audit process was that acceptable. And the auditor could be allowed to have periodic reviews by the user's auditor of the organization, which means instead of having the third-party auditor, we might have an agreement that says my auditor can go and audit your organization because you're working for me.